Charles Manson, born November 12, 1934, was a criminal and cult leader who formed what became known as the Manson family, a quasi-commune in California in the late 1960s. Manson and his followers, mostly young, impressionable women, were responsible for a series of murders in 1969 that shocked the United States due to their brutal nature and the high-profile status of some of the victims. The Manson family cult. Manson's teachings were a bizarre blend of Scientology, fringe psychology, Beatles music, and the Book of Revelations. He convinced his followers that he was a manifestation of Jesus and that they were the original Christians. He preached that an apocalyptic race war, which he called Helter Skelter, after a Beatles song, was imminent. Manson said that this war would result in the annihilation of all the whites by the blacks, but that the Manson family would survive by hiding in a secret city beneath the desert. After the war, Manson claimed the family would emerge to rule the blacks, who Manson asserted were incapable of governing themselves. The Manson family murders. In July and August of 1969, Manson ordered his followers to commit a series of murders. His motive was apparently to incite the race war he had predicted, as he ordered his followers to leave false clues that would implicate the Black Panthers, a radical black political group of the time. The most infamous of these murders occurred on August 9th, 1969, when 4 members of the Manson family, Charles Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian, invaded the home of actress Sharon Tate. Tate, who was 8 months pregnant, was murdered along with 4 other people at her home: Jay Sebring, a noted hairstylist; Abigail Folger, an heiress to the Folger coffee fortune; Wojciech Frykowski, Folger's boyfriend; and Stephen Parent, a friend of the estate's caretaker. The killers wrote the word "pig" in blood on the front door. The following night, Manson family members murdered Lino and Rosemary LaBianca, a wealthy Los Angeles couple, in their home. Again, they wrote words in blood at the crime scene: "Death to pigs" and "Helter Skelter, sick." The aftermath. The crimes went unsolved for several months until one of the family members, Susan Atkins, who was in jail on an unrelated charge, confessed to her cellmate. The ensuing trial was a media sensation. Manson, Watson, Atkins, Krenwinkel, and another family member, Leslie Van Houten, were all convicted of multiple counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death in 1971. However, their sentences were commuted to life in prison when the California Supreme Court invalidated the state's death penalty statutes in 1972. Manson died in prison in 2017, but his name remains synonymous with one of the most chilling series of crimes in American history. The Manson family murders are often seen as marking the symbolic end of the 1960s counterculture. The Zodiac Killer is one of the most infamous unidentified serial killers in American history. Active from the late 1960s to the early 1970s, this individual operated in Northern California, particularly around the San Francisco Bay Area. The crimes the Zodiac Killer is directly linked to 5 murders and 2 attempted murders that occurred between December 1968 and October 1969, though the killer claimed to have killed as many as 37 people in his cryptic letters. The confirmed victims were usually young couples in secluded areas near San Francisco, though one San Francisco cab driver was also killed. The first confirmed incident took place on December 20th, 1968, when teenagers Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday were shot to death in Benicia, California. The second confirmed attack occurred on July 4th, 1969, when Michael Mageau and Darlene Ferrin were shot in Vallejo, California. Mageau survived the attack, but Ferrin did not. On September 27th, 1969, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were stabbed at Lake Berryessa in Napa County. Hartnell survived, but Shepard did not. The final confirmed murder was that of cab driver Paul Stein, who was shot in the Presidio Heights neighborhood of San Francisco on October 11th, 1969. The letters. The Zodiac Killer is perhaps most famous for the series of taunting letters and cryptograms he sent to the San Francisco Bay Area press and others. The first such letter arrived at 3 different newspapers on August 1st, 1969. In the letters, the killer took credit for the shootings in Benicia and Vallejo, providing details of the crimes that were not released to the public. The letters were signed with a symbol, a circle with a cross through it, which has come to be known as the Zodiac symbol. Over time, The Zodiac sent more letters, including 4 cryptograms or ciphers. Only one of these ciphers has been definitively solved, in which the killer seems to express a belief that his victims would be his slaves in the afterlife. The investigation. The case of the Zodiac Killer has been one of the most challenging and frustrating for law enforcement. Despite the massive manhunt and investigation, the Zodiac Killer's identity remains unknown. Over the years, many suspects have been considered and various theories have been proposed, but none have been proven. As of my knowledge cut off in 2021, the Zodiac Killer's identity remains one of the great unsolved mysteries in the annals of American crime. The Zodiac case has inspired numerous books, films, and television series due to its enduring mystery and the macabre fascination with the killer's cryptic messages. O.J. Simpson, whose full name is Orenthal James Simpson, was a renowned former professional American football player and actor. In 1994, he became the center of one of the most high-profile trials in American history when he was accused of murdering his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend, Ronald Goldman. The crime. On the night of June 12, 1994, Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman were found brutally murdered outside Nicole's condominium in the Brentwood neighborhood of Los Angeles. Police quickly began an investigation. The Bronco chase. On June 17, 1994, Simpson was expected to turn himself in to the authorities. Instead, he became the subject of a low-speed pursuit in a white Ford Bronco, driven by his friend Al Cowlings. The chase was broadcast live on television and watched by approximately 95 million people in the U.S., making it one of the most viewed events in American television history. Simpson eventually surrendered at his home in Brentwood. The trial. The trial began in January 1995 and was broadcast live on television, drawing massive public attention. The prosecution presented DNA evidence linking Simpson to the crime scene, but the defense team, led by Johnny Cochran and including F. Lee Bailey, Robert Shapiro, and Robert Kardashian, argued that the Los Angeles Police Department, LAPD, had planted or contaminated the evidence as part of a racist conspiracy to frame Simpson. A key moment in the trial was when Simpson attempted to put on a pair of gloves that the prosecution said were worn by the murderer and were found at the crime scene. The gloves appeared to be too small for Simpson's hands, leading Cochran to famously state, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." The verdict and aftermath. On October 3, 1995, after more than 8 months of proceedings, the jury found Simpson not guilty of both murders. The verdict was watched by more than 100 million people and sparked widespread debate and controversy. The families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman later filed a civil suit against Simpson. In 1997, a civil court awarded a $33.5 million judgment against Simpson for the victims' wrongful deaths. The O.J. Simpson trial, often called the trial of the century, had a significant cultural impact. It highlighted deep-seated issues of race, class, and celebrity status in the American justice system, and it was a pivotal moment in the development of the 24-hour news cycle and reality television. Theodore Ted Bundy is one of the most notorious serial killers in U.S. history. Active during the 1970s, Bundy was known for his charm and good looks, which he used to gain the trust of his victims. His crimes and the subsequent media attention have made him a figure of enduring interest and study. Crimes. Bundy confessed to killing 30 women and girls, but the real number is suspected to be higher. His modus operandi typically involved approaching his victims in public places and feigning injury or disability, or impersonating an authority figure before overpowering them and taking them to a secluded location. Once there, he would rape and murder them. Bundy was also known to return to the scenes of his crimes to perform sexual acts with the decomposing bodies until putrefaction made it too unbearable. He would often keep souvenirs, like body parts or personal items from his victims. Capture and escape. Bundy was first arrested in 1975 in Utah for a failed kidnapping attempt. While in custody, investigators linked him to multiple missing persons cases in several states. In 1976, Bundy was convicted of kidnapping and assault and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Incredibly, while preparing for his murder trial in Colorado, Bundy escaped from custody twice in 1977. During his second escape, he managed to elude authorities for several months and made his way to Florida, where he committed further violent crimes, including 3 murders. Trial and execution. Bundy was eventually recaptured in Florida in 1978 and was put on trial for the murders of 2 Florida State University sorority sisters and a 12-year-old girl. The trial was notable, as it was one of the first to be televised nationally in the United States. Bundy, who had a degree in psychology and had been accepted to law school, insisted on representing himself during the proceedings, adding another bizarre layer to the trial. Bundy was found guilty and was sentenced to death in 1979. While on death row, he confessed to 30 homicides committed in 7 states between 1974 and 1978, though the actual count could be higher. He was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison on January 24, 1989. Legacy. Ted Bundy continues to fascinate the public and criminologists due to his seemingly dual nature. On the surface, a charming, intelligent, and handsome man, but beneath that, a ruthless serial killer. His life and crimes have been the subject of numerous books, films, and television series. Despite the horror and tragedy of his actions, his case has contributed to our understanding of violent criminal behavior and psychopathy. Theodore Ted Kaczynski, better known as the Unabomber, is a domestic terrorist who conducted a mail bombing campaign in the United States over nearly 2 decades, from the late 1970s to the mid-1990s. His targets were individuals and institutions associated with modern technology and industrial society. The bombings. Between 1978 and 1995, Kaczynski mailed or hand-delivered a series of increasingly sophisticated bombs that ultimately killed 3 people and injured 23 others. The bombs were primarily sent to individuals involved in the development or promotion of technology, including university professors, executives, and computer store owners. The bombs and the ensuing investigations led the FBI to launch one of its most extensive manhunts, known as Unabomb, University and Airline Bomber Investigation, from which Kaczynski's moniker Unabomber was derived. The Manifesto. In 1995, Kaczynski sent a 35,000-word essay titled Industrial Society and Its Future, but commonly known as the Unabomber Manifesto, to several news outlets. In it, he argued that the Industrial Revolution and its consequences had been disastrous for the human race, and advocated for a return to primitive living. He also threatened to continue his bombing campaign if his manifesto wasn't published. The New York Times and the Washington Post, in consultation with the FBI, decided to publish the manifesto, hoping that someone might recognize the writing style or the ideas it contained. Arrest and trial. The strategy worked. Kaczynski's brother David recognized the writing and the philosophy in the manifesto and alerted the FBI, leading to Kaczynski's arrest at his remote cabin in Montana in April 1996. During his trial, Kaczynski attempted to dismiss his court-appointed lawyers because they wanted to use an insanity defense, which he opposed. He tried to represent himself, but the judge denied his request. In 1998, to avoid the death penalty, Kaczynski pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Legacy. The Unabomber case is often associated with themes of anti-technology, anti-industrialism, and the potential dangers of unchecked mental illness. The case also raised ethical questions about publishing a terrorist's threats and played a significant role in the evolution of forensic linguistics. Today, Kaczynski's crimes are frequently referenced in discussions about domestic terrorism and the potential adverse effects of technological advancement on society. The Oklahoma City bombing was a domestic terrorist attack that occurred on April 19, 1995. It remains one of the deadliest acts of domestic terrorism in U.S. history. The attack was carried out by Timothy McVeigh, an Army veteran and militia movement sympathizer, and Terry Nichols, an anti-government extremist. The 2 men planned and executed the bombing as a response to what they perceived as a tyrannical federal government, specifically citing the incidents at Ruby Ridge, Idaho in 1992 and the Waco siege in Texas in 1993 as their motivation. McVeigh parked a yellow Ryder truck filled with a lethal mix of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, diesel fuel, and other chemicals in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City. At 9:02 a.m., the bomb exploded, destroying a third of the building and causing severe damage to numerous other buildings in the vicinity. The explosion killed 168 people, including 19 children, and injured over 500 others. Rescue workers, volunteers, and medical personnel worked tirelessly in the aftermath to rescue survivors from the rubble and provide aid to the injured. Investigation and trial. McVeigh was arrested shortly after the bombing for a traffic violation and was quickly tied to the bombing due to evidence found in his car. Nichols was identified as a co-conspirator and turned himself in 2 days after the bombing. The subsequent trials were closely followed by the public. In 1997, McVeigh was found guilty on 11 federal counts, including conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction, use of a weapon of mass destruction, destruction with the use of explosives, and 8 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death and was executed by lethal injection in June 2001. Nichols was found guilty of conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction and 8 counts of involuntary manslaughter for the federal agent's deaths. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Impact. The Oklahoma City bombing deeply affected the United States, leading to heightened security measures across the country, especially around federal buildings. The bombing also led to legislative actions, including the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996. The bombing site is now home to the Oklahoma City National Memorial, which honors the victims, survivors, rescuers, and all who were affected by the bombing. Jeffrey Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, was an American serial killer and sex offender who committed the murders of 17 young men and boys between 1978 and 1991. His crimes involved rape, dismemberment, necrophilia, and cannibalism, making him one of the most notorious criminals in American history. Crimes. Dahmer's killings involved a disturbing pattern. He would typically lure young men to his home under various pretenses, such as posing for photographs or offering money for sex. Once at his home, Dahmer would drug his victims and then strangle them. Following their deaths, Dahmer would engage in sexual acts with the bodies before dismembering them. He kept photographs of his victims at various stages of the dismemberment process as souvenirs. In later confessions, Dahmer admitted to engaging in necrophilia and cannibalism, claiming that these acts made him feel as though his victims were permanently with him. Dahmer also attempted to create zombies out of some of his victims by injecting hydrochloric acid or boiling water into their brains in an attempt to induce a permanent, unresistant, submissive state. These experiments proved fatal. Arrest and conviction. Dahmer was arrested on July 22, 1991, after one of his intended victims managed to escape and flagged down 2 police officers. The young man led the officers back to Dahmer's apartment, where they discovered photographs of dismembered bodies. A subsequent search of Dahmer's home revealed a horrifying collection of photographs, human remains, and evidence of his gruesome activities. Dahmer was charged with and later confessed to the murders of 17 young men and boys. His trial began in January 1992. Despite Dahmer's plea of insanity, the jury found him sane and guilty on 15 counts of murder. He was sentenced to 15 life terms in prison, a cumulative total of 957 years. Death. Dahmer was killed by a fellow inmate, Christopher Scarver, at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin on November 28, 1994. Legacy. Dahmer's horrific crimes have been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and films. His case has been studied extensively by criminologists, psychologists, and profilers attempting to understand the factors that lead to such extreme criminal behavior. Dahmer himself has become a symbol of the macabre fascination society has with the most disturbing and violent aspects of the human psyche. Gary Leon Ridgeway, also known as the Green River Killer, is one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. His crimes were committed over nearly 2 decades in the late 20th century. Crimes. Ridgeway targeted women and girls in and around King County, Washington, which includes the city of Seattle. His victims were often sex workers or runaways, whom he believed would not be immediately missed, and whose disappearances would not be quickly investigated. He would typically approach his victims in public places and lure them to a secluded area. After strangling his victims, Ridgeway would dump their bodies in forested and overgrown areas in the county, particularly along the Green River, which led to his nickname, the Green River Killer. Investigation. The investigation into the Green River killings began in 1982 when the first victims were discovered. Despite extensive efforts, including the involvement of famous FBI profiler Johnny Douglas and Ted Bundy, another notorious serial killer who offered to help from prison, the case remained unsolved for many years. Ridgeway was actually a suspect early in the investigation. He had been arrested in 1982 and 2001 on charges related to prostitution, and he had taken a polygraph test in 1984, which he passed. However, there was not enough evidence to charge him with the murders. Arrest and conviction. The case finally broke in 2001 when advancements in DNA technology allowed investigators to match DNA from some of the crime scenes to a sample that Ridgeway had given in 1987. Once confronted with this evidence, Ridgeway confessed to more killings. In 2003, he pleaded guilty to 48 counts of aggravated first-degree murder, although he claimed he had killed as many as 80 women. As part of a plea deal to avoid the death penalty, Ridgeway agreed to cooperate with investigators and show them where he had dumped the bodies of still missing women. In 2011, Ridgeway was charged with a 49th murder, that of Rebecca Marrero, whose remains were found in 2010. Ridgeway pleaded guilty to this charge in 2011. Imprisonment. Ridgeway is currently serving life imprisonment without parole at the Washington State Penitentiary. His case brought attention to the plight of vulnerable and marginalized women who are often targeted by predators, and whose disappearances sometimes don't receive the attention they deserve. Joseph James DAngelo, also known as the Golden State Killer, the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker, and the Visalia Ransacker, is a former police officer who committed a series of horrific crimes in various regions of California, from the mid-1970s to mid-1980s. These crimes included at least 13 murders, 50 sexual assaults, and over 100 burglaries. Crimes. DAngelo's crimes began in 1974 in Visalia, California, where he committed a series of burglaries and attempted kidnappings, earning him the moniker Visalia Ransacker. In these crimes, he was known for ransacking homes, taking small items, and leaving behind larger valuables. In 1976, DAngelo's criminal activities escalated, and he became known as the East Area Rapist. He targeted women who were home alone or with their children in the Eastern District of Sacramento County. His modus operandi typically involved breaking into homes in the early morning hours, tying up his victims, and then assaulting them. By 1979, DAngelo's crimes had escalated to murder. He moved his activities to Southern California, where he committed a series of brutal home invasion murders. These crimes were initially attributed to a criminal dubbed the original Night Stalker. For decades, it was not understood that these crime sprees across California were the work of one man. It wasn't until 2001, with the advent of DNA profiling, that investigators were able to link the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker cases and realized they were looking for a single individual who was then given the name Golden State Killer. Investigation and arrest. Despite extensive investigations, the Golden State Killer eluded capture for more than 40 years. The breakthrough came in 2018 when investigators used a novel investigative technique, forensic genealogy. Investigators uploaded the Golden State Killer's DNA profile obtained from a crime scene to a public genealogy database, GEDmatch. They identified distant relatives of the suspect and constructed a large family tree. By cross-referencing the family tree with crime locations and ages of potential suspects, they narrowed down the suspect pool, eventually leading them to Joseph James DAngelo. DAngelo was arrested at his home in Citrus Heights, California on April 24, 2018. Investigators confirmed his identity as the Golden State Killer with a direct DNA match. Trial and conviction. In June 2020, DAngelo pleaded guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder and special circumstances, including murder committed during burglaries and rapes, as well as 13 counts of kidnapping. He also admitted to numerous crimes he was not charged with, including rapes, as the statute of limitations had expired for those offenses. In August 2020, DAngelo was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His capture marked a victory for law enforcement and demonstrated the power of genealogical DNA databases in solving crimes, which has implications for privacy and criminal investigations. The murder of JonBenet Ramsey is one of the most high-profile unsolved cases in American criminal history, notorious for its media frenzy, a multitude of theories, and the lack of a conclusive resolution. Background and murder. JonBenet Ramsey was a 6-year-old beauty pageant queen from Boulder, Colorado. On December 26, 1996, her mother, Patsy Ramsey, called the police to report that she had found a ransom note demanding $118,000 for JonBenet's safe return. However, later that day, JonBenet's father, John Ramsey, discovered her body in the basement of their home. She had been strangled with a blow to her head, and her mouth was covered with duct tape. Investigation and controversy. The investigation into JonBenet's murder was marked by controversy from the start. Despite the ransom note, the police initially treated the Ramsey home as a crime scene rather than a kidnapping site. It was also reported that the crime scene was not properly secured, which could have led to contamination of evidence. The media quickly latched onto the case, with particular attention given to the Ramsey family's wealth, JonBenet's participation in child beauty pageants, and the peculiarities of the ransom note. The Ramsey family, particularly John and Patsy, came under intense public and media scrutiny, and they were considered suspects for a time. Suspects and theories. Over the years, the list of suspects and theories about JonBenet's murder has grown. They range from an intruder who entered the home to a family member who accidentally killed JonBenet and then staged the scene to look like a kidnapping gone wrong, to the involvement of a child sex ring. John Mark Carr, a schoolteacher who confessed to the crime in 2006, was arrested but was later released when DNA tests failed to link him to the crime scene. Current status. In 2008, new DNA testing technology resulted in the discovery of an unknown male's DNA in JonBenet's underwear and leggings. This led the Boulder District Attorney's Office to officially apologize to the Ramsey family for the suspicion they had been under and to confirm that they were no longer considered suspects. Despite the considerable media attention and extensive investigations, the case remains unsolved as of my knowledge cutoff in September 2021. The murder of JonBenet Ramsey continues to captivate the public due to its enduring mystery and the unsettling juxtaposition of JonBenet's childhood innocence with the grim circumstances of her death.